The Principality of Sealand is a platform outside of British waters, inhabited by a group of people who claim sovereignty over their small piece of man-made land in international waters. The country is extremely interested in proving their sovereignty on the international stage legally, and when writing about their history are extremely interested in making this case. I, for one, don't really think they'll ever count as a sovereign state, but I wish them the best of luck in their case against every country in the world, I guess. The Principality of Sealand is a former British defensive sea platform constructed in 1990 to defend against an attack from the Nazi German Navy. I found some second-hand information about the building of these platforms in this time book on World War II. I have 8 of these things, and they're filled with information and pictures from the war, which makes them super cool. According to this book, they're made of concrete but filled with air, and then floated into position. Then they're filled with seawater and slowly attached to the sea floor. These proved to be effective in the war, seeing as the Allies won. At the end of the war, to save money, the British Navy decided to leave these defensive platforms instead of remove or destroy them. According to the Sealand website, which has one of the funniest names for a website ever, www.sealandgov.org, this would lead to issues in the United Kingdom when in 1966, Roy Bates, now known as Prince Roy Bates, would create a pirate radio station, a radio station meant to broadcast into a country while being stationed outside of it in order to skirt the law on the sea platform known as Knockjohn. Knockjohn is not what is currently known as Sealand today. Being within a 3-mile radius of the shore of Britain, it fell within its waters and was legally shut down. Roy then moved himself and his family to another sea platform roughly 7 miles offshore of Britain named Ruff's Tower. Sealand's first piece of evidence for their sovereignty comes in 1968, when Roy had moved to Ruff's Tower, which will now be known as Sealand. By the way, Roy named himself Prince, his son Michael a Prince, and his wife Joan a Princess, presumably not King and Queen as to not anger Big Lizzie. Roy and his family were summoned to court for possessing a .22 caliber gun, which, as an American, is pretty funny. I'm pretty sure if I had talked to an average American gun owner and told them that I got court summons for owning a .22 caliber gun, I would be laughed out of the room. But that's not here nor there. It's Britain. The court dismissed the case because they were outside the court's jurisdiction, i.e. being in international waters. The Sealand website states this as the first de facto recognition of the Principality of Sealand, which I'm not sure if this recognizes Sealand as a sovereign state as much as it recognizes it as being in international waters. Like, if Sealand had been a boat that was always at sea and they had a gun on the boat but it never came into the UK, it would probably have been the same deal. This court summons is all after the British Coast Guard had begun harassing them by telling them to leave. Instead of leaving, the people of Sealand harassed right back. The Sealand website doesn't say this, but I remember reading a few years ago that they used the old gun that had been on the platform to take pot shots at the boats, but it doesn't say that anymore, so it could have been fake. Either way, eventually the Coast Guard decided to leave them alone and they didn't pursue any other firearms lawsuits against them. The problem from the British government's perspective is that Sealand is not within the UK's borders, so they don't directly control it, but the platform was theirs at one point. They disregarded international law at the time of the creation of the platform because they were at war and they didn't really see the point, but Sealand could be a pain in the ass for them at some point. Now, here's where the history of Sealand gets really interesting. In 1978, a group of German and Dutch entrepreneurs reached out to Roy Bates to make a deal regarding diamond trading. I don't know what this deal was about, but given Sealand's previous history of skirting the law by being in international waters, I bet it was ethically dubious at best. However, when Roy and Joan went to Austria to meet them, they realized something was up. It turns out that they had taken a helicopter to Sealand in order to hostilely take it over. It was easy given that Roy's children were the only ones there, but Sealand's website describes them as trained mercenaries. This may be true, but I haven't seen another article corroborate this. They then founded the Republic of Sealand, because apparently they don't believe in monarchies. Also, why did they want to take over Sealand? For the clout? That just seems so dumb. They took a sea platform in international waters with what seems like no plan, and they even took their kids hostage. What do you gain from that? Anyway, when Roy and Joan found out, they gathered some friends, some guns, specifically shotguns, and stormed Sealand. They won the fight and took the pirates hostage. Roy then followed the procedure of the Geneva Convention, letting the prisoners of war go once the war was over. However, for some weird reason, one of the prisoners had a Sealand passport, so they tried him for treason and found him guilty. This meant that the German embassy in London had to send a diplomat to Sealand to broker a release, which is insane. Sealand uses this international interaction as proof that they're a real country. I don't know what land we're living in, but this isn't some normal Earth shit. Like, why does this happen? Does Germany consider them a country? Or is this just treated as if the pirates took somebody hostage normally? It's just so weird. Part of me thinks this whole thing was staged so that they could claim that they had international communication and use this to attempt to legitimize themselves, because who else would go through all the effort just for a World War II sea platform except for Roy Bates? In any case, Roy Bates wrote a book about it and sells it on his website, if that's at all interesting. If it was staged to legitimize themselves, then it didn't really work, because the UK doesn't recognize them as a country. There were a couple of times where Sealand used its position on international waters to its advantage. They installed some microwave towers and a large server to facilitate what I have to assume is internet piracy, even though they don't really say that explicitly, but why else would you have giant servers on a sea base in the middle of the ocean? Sealand also sells titles like Lord, Lady, Sir, Duke, Duchess, and even Count and Countess. It's a pretty interesting business and it's been around for as long as I've known about them. They also have an email hosting service where you can get an @sealandgov.org email, since the sealand.gov would require them to be a recognized government. I'm personally waiting to get my email until after they get the .gov. While doing research for this, I found a journal article by Andrew Lyon titled The Principality of Sealand and its Case for Sovereign Recognition, which makes some philosophical arguments about why Sealand should be sovereign. As far as I'm concerned, Sealand is about as sovereign as John McAfee was while he was sitting in his yacht in the international waters. He never paid his taxes, so I guess that's pretty sovereign. Also, if Prince Michael ever sees this, I'd love to talk to you. You and your family's history is very interesting, and I'd love to know more. Because of the unorthodox nature of Sealand, there aren't too many scholarly sources on Sealand, so I don't trust most of the information I'm getting. Anyway, that was a weird thing I've been obsessed with since I was in high school. I needed to get off my chest. I'll be keeping it morally dubious.